Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're zeroing in on something really fascinating. It's the world of inset, the false banana in Ethiopia, and how it connects really intricately with gender equality and, well, women's empowerment.
Exactly. And if you're looking to get a solid grasp on this quickly, but, thoroughly, that's what we're aiming for today.
We've pulled together quite a bit of research looking into Enset cultivation, its role in food security, which is huge, and all the gender dynamics bubbling underneath.
Yeah, and NSAID is just, it's compelling, isn't it? It's not just any crop. It's native to Ethiopia, super resilient, drought tolerant.
Every single part gets used, right?
Every single part. It's basically the lifeline for millions in the southern and southwestern highlands. Really the backbone.
Okay, so here's the thing we kept bumping up against. NSAID is often called a women's crop. Sounds straightforward, maybe, but we really need to unpack that. Does that label automatically mean empowerment? Or, could it actually hide a situation where women do most of the heavy lifting without getting the full benefits?
That's the core question, really.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. Look at the traditional roles, the real economic impact, the cultural weight it carries. Who's actually calling the shots, decision-making wise?
Access to services, too, the challenges, what's being done to empower women, and, well, what the future might hold for insect cultivation.
It's a critical thing to dissect because, you see women doing so much work, and it's easy to just jump to, oh, they must be empowered.
Right, a superficial conclusion. But the real picture, as usual, is in the details. It's not just who does the work, but who benefits, who holds the power.
Exactly. So let's start with the work itself.
Yeah.
The traditional way tasks are split between men and women in NSAID farming. What does that usually look like?
Well, traditionally, it follows a pretty defined gender pattern. Women handle the tasks that are really labor-intensive and time-consuming.
Like what specifically?
Things like planting, the continuous upkeep, maintenance, harvesting, which is physically demanding, and maybe most significantly, the whole processing stage. Crushing, scraping, grading, all that.
And processing is almost all women.
Yeah, the research is pretty clear on that. Using the traditional methods, it's almost universally seen as women's work. Imagine breaking down the pseudostem, the corm,
Right.
then this laborious scraping and grating to get the starchy pulp out. It's incredibly physical, takes hours, often daily. It's a huge chunk of women's time and energy.
Sounds like a massive amount of unpaid labor, basically.
Right.
So where do men usually fit in?
Men typically get involved with planting the young shoots initially. They often help with weeding the fields periodically.
Okay.
And sometimes they'll assist with harvesting, especially the heavier stuff like cutting down the plants. But their involvement tends to be more, sporadic, less about the day in, day out grind of processing that women handle.
Okay, now here's where it gets, well, really interesting. Women are doing all this intense work in the fields, the processing,
Mm.
but what happens when it's ready for market or use in the community?
This is often where you see a shift, a crucial shift in control, the marketing and trade side that's frequently dominated by men.
So the more profitable part.
Exactly. That's where the higher profit margins usually are. So women are the main producers through their labor, but men often control the bit that's more economically advantageous.
Creating a bottleneck.
Pretty much. Women's hard work doesn't automatically mean proportional financial gain. It can kind of perpetuate dependence, even though they're crucial to production. It's a common pattern, really, in agriculture value chains.
We did see a specific example, though, in the Wanchi district. What was different there?
Yeah, Wanchi is a fascinating contrast. Men are involved early on, sure, but women mostly handle processing enset into kocho. That's the fermented sort of bread-like staple.
Right.
And importantly, in Wanchi, women also largely manage the marketing of that kocho, and they control the income from those sales.
Oh, interesting.
It suggests that, in certain places, women can and do have more agency, more control, further down the economic chain.
So it's not totally uniform across Ethiopia. There's regional variation.
Absolutely not uniform. While the general trend is women heavy in production, men in marketing, there are definitely regional differences. Like, in some areas, men might help more consistently with the really tough parts of harvesting.
But overall, this division, women doing so much work, men often controlling the money, seems to have some pretty big consequences, doesn't it?
Oh, without a doubt. The biggest, most immediate one. That disproportionate burden of physically demanding, often unpaid, labor landing squarely on women.
Hmm.
Even though they're absolutely critical for producing the food that sustains everyone, the power over sales, over the money, often stays with the men, usually as household heads.
And what does that heavy workload do to women's lives beyond just the inset work?
Well, it seriously cuts down on their free time, which then limits their ability to, say, do other income-generating things, get education for themselves or their kids, or even just participate in community life, have a voice. And then you have these cultural taboos, really deeply ingrained, that discourage men from doing the processing, that just reinforces the roles and stops any potential for sharing the load more fairly.
So, summing up that imbalance, women contribute massively, but it doesn't automatically equal economic power or social standing.
Precisely. Their huge input in cultivation and processing might not translate into comparable empowerment because of that pattern of male control over income in so many places. It
Yeah.
can inadvertently keep gender inequalities locked in place.
And those cultural norms discouraging men from processing. That sounds like a really tough barrier if you're trying to make things more equitable.
It really is. They don't just lock in the roles, they can put a potentially unsustainable, unfair burden on the women in these farming households.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit to the economics directly. We've touched on it, but just how crucial is NSET as a source of income and food security for women and families?
Oh, it's absolutely fundamental. Research consistently shows women rely on it, not just for food, obviously, but as a vital way to get cash, especially when they hit financial rough patches.
Hmm.
The income from selling processed stuff like cocho and bulla is often directly controlled by women, particularly if they're heading the household. And that money gets used for essential household needs.
So it's like a critical safety net for them.
Totally. A readily available resource they can process and sell when unexpected costs pop up. And in some places, like with the garage people, women are reported to have, relatively speaking, more economic independence, and that's significantly linked to their NSET work, sometimes even land ownership related to it.
That sounds positive.
Yeah.
But we also saw info about some pretty major limitations women face in getting real economic independence through NSET.
Yeah, absolutely. Despite those income avenues, women often hit significant roadblocks. Social norms frequently dictate that men, as household heads, have the main right to control sales and manage the money.
So that directly limits women's financial benefit from their own labor.
Exactly. And then there's their direct involvement in the market itself.
Do women usually sell directly?
Often, not so much. The number of women selling directly in local markets can be limited, and those who do might face challenges dealing with traders who are often mostly men.
Right.
And this male dominance goes further up the chain, too. Men tend to control the more profitable roles, like collectors, brokers, leaving women concentrated in the less lucrative initial production and processing stages.
So NSET might boost overall household income, but a woman's individual income and financial freedom can still be quite restricted.
Precisely. And it's worth noting, poorer households might actually grow more inset proportionally because it's so critical for their basic food security.
But overall market participation by NSET producers is pretty low.
Generally, yes.
Why is that? Why isn't more getting to market?
It's a few things tangled together. A lot of production is traditionally geared towards just feeding the family, subsistence, not big market sales. Plus, there's often a lack of access to better processing tech, things that could add value.
Make it more marketable.
Yeah, exactly. And limited market info, poor transport to get it further afield. It all adds up.
So if we try to summarize women's control and access regarding the economic benefits,
Yeah.
it sounds really mixed, often unfair.
It really is. They might control certain products or small local sales, but getting significant income, credit, owning the plants themselves, accessing bigger market opportunities, often quite limited.
And the recurring barrier is male control over the income, despite women's labor.
That's the persistent issue. It really highlights the need for interventions, specifically targeting women's financial control and tackling those deeper structural inequalities in the market.
Definitely. Just growing more NSET isn't enough if women don't control the benefits.
Absolutely not.
Now, let's shift again slightly.
Yeah.
Talk about the social and cultural meaning NSET holds, especially for women. It sounds like it's way more than just food.
Oh, absolutely. It's woven deep into the cultural fabric of so many groups in southern Ethiopia, the Garage, Sidama, Walaita, among others. It's a cornerstone of traditions, rituals, daily life. Not just sustenance, it's a powerful cultural symbol.
How does it show up in important rituals and ceremonies?
Well, it's symbolically tied to major life events. Enset dishes like kocho and bulla are essential at births, funerals, weddings.
Really?
Yeah, they represent really important community values: fertility, resilience, continuity, well-being, prosperity. It's central.
And that term, the tree against hunger, that's very evocative.
It is, isn't it? Its resilience, especially how it withstands drought, earned it that name. It speaks volumes about its role in preventing famine in a historically vulnerable region. That reliability has cemented its cultural importance.
And it sounds like women are key in preserving all the traditional knowledge around Enset.
Absolutely central. Women are the main keepers and transmitters of the indigenous knowledge about how to grow it, how to process it, knowledge passed down generation after generation.
Hmm.
In some communities, women actually have more detailed expertise than men in identifying the different Enset varieties, the land races. It shows their deep practical understanding.
So this deep cultural connection, women's central role, that could be a real strength for empowerment efforts, couldn't it?
It provides a really strong, meaningful foundation. If development programs recognize and value women's knowledge and roles, they can engage more effectively, build trust, address their specific needs.
But there's a flip side to that strong cultural context.
Exactly. We have to be aware of the potential downside. The same cultural context that makes NSET so important can also kind of inadvertently perpetuate those traditional gender roles that limit women's economic benefit.
Because processing is so strongly seen as women's work.
Yes, and the fact that norms or even taboos might stop men from helping out, that contributes hugely to the unequal workload.
So empowerment efforts need to walk a fine line, value the culture, but challenge the norms within it that hold women back.
Precisely. Build on the cultural value and women's roles, but directly tackle the embedded inequalities within that same context.
Let's dig into decision-making power. Despite women doing so much, what's their typical level of, say, in important farm and household decisions?
Yeah, this is another critical area with a frequent imbalance. Despite all their labor, women often have limited input on key decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Men, often seen as the household heads, tend to hold the main authority, especially over things like selling NSET, managing the money, bigger farm investments.
So resource ownership and decision-making power tilt heavily towards men.
That's what the research generally points to. But it's not always black and white. You might see women having some control over, say, when to harvest, probably because they're the ones doing the processing right after.
Right, that makes sense.
And like we mentioned, garage women seem to have more economic independence, which might mean more, say, in financial stuff at home.
And does marital status matter?
Interestingly, yes. Some research suggests single women, especially household heads, might have more autonomy in decisions about farming and spending compared to married women in a more patriarchal setup.
It sounds like the development sector is trying to tackle this to boost women's participation.
There's definitely growing recognition. Supporting women-only farmer groups, for example, seems quite helpful.
How so?
Well, these groups give women better access to information, training, resources, but also, importantly, they create a supportive space. Women can build confidence to speak up and get involved in decisions.
But that core contradiction, women doing the work but having limited say, remains a key issue.
It really does. Addressing that is crucial for genuine gender equality. Making sure women's voices are heard, considered in matters affecting their lives and communities. Creating those platforms for participation is vital.
Okay, moving beyond the farm gate. What's the link between Enset cultivation and women's access to things like education, healthcare, social services?
This connection is often more complex, more indirect than the links with labor and economics. Okay.
While Enset is obviously vital for food security and can give women some financial leeway, the direct evidence we looked at doesn't strongly tie Enset farming itself to major improvements in accessing education or healthcare directly.
But NSET does have clear nutritional benefits, right? Especially for women and kids.
Absolutely. Several studies suggest eating Enset can improve nutrition, potentially higher levels of things like vitamin B12, folate compared to maize. And fermented Enset helps fight iron deficiency anemia, a big issue for many women there.
So nutrition is an indirect pathway to potentially better health.
Exactly. And more broadly, research shows when women are more empowered in agriculture generally, household nutrition tends to improve. So there's that link too. Theoretically, if women get more financial autonomy from Enset, they could invest more in healthcare, education. But, and it's a big but, that depends heavily on whether they actually control that income.
And could the sheer amount of labor involved in traditional NSET work actually be a barrier to accessing services? That's a really sharp point. Yes. The intense labor could very well limit women's time and energy, making it harder to get to clinics, schools, or participate in other programs.
So NSET helps food security, nutrition. But the direct impact on education and healthcare seems indirect and really depends on income control and workload.
That sums up the current understanding pretty well. We probably need more specific research looking directly at those connections for a clearer picture.
Let's dig a bit deeper into the specific gender challenges women face with NSET. We've touched on some, but what are the key inequalities?
Well, a huge one is definitely the heavy workload from traditional processing. Crushing, scraping, grating. It's incredibly time-consuming, physically demanding.
Yeah, the tools aren't great.
Often rudimentary, can even cause injuries. And women often lack access to info or opportunities for labor-saving tech that could really ease that burden.
And we keep circling back to the value chain issue. How does that inequality play out specifically?
It's substantial. Men largely dominate the marketing channels, collecting from farms, wholesale, retail. This limits women's market access, often forcing them to sell cheap to male traders.
So they capture a much smaller profit share.
Exactly, despite being central to production.
And those social and cultural barriers we talked about,
Right.
they seem to underpin everything else, don't they?
They absolutely do. Traditional roles give women most of the hard labor, men the control over income and decisions. Those norms can even stop men from helping with processing, adding to women's load.
Right.
And the same norms often restrict women's access to other crucial things: land, credit, agricultural advice, and training.
So key challenges: massive workload, limited tech access, value chain inequality, poor market access, and those persistent social and cultural barriers reinforcing it all.
Exactly. It's a complex web. They're all interconnected and need tackling together.
Now, it is encouraging that there seems to be growing awareness and efforts to make changes. What kinds of empowerment projects are happening in Ethiopia?
Yeah, there's definitely increasing focus from development groups, government, NGOs, recognizing Enset as key for both women's empowerment and climate adaptation. The goal is to tackle these challenges and unlock Enset's potential for women.
Can you give some specific examples of what's being done?
Sure. UN Women has an initiative, ICI, which provides business and life skills training, financial support, not just Enset, but it benefits women involved.
Okay.
Alabaster International has an Enset food security initiative, setting up craft cooperatives for Enset products, community processing sites with better tech in the Gamo Highlands. There's the DID Arab project working on improving processing, quality, seed multiplication in the Southwest. And the Swiss Development Cooperation, SDC, has supported women's co-ops and introduced better tech like mechanical scrappers, improved fermentation.
Sounds like a range of approaches, hitting different problems.
Yeah.
What are the common themes across these projects?
Well, you often see a focus on improving processing tech to cut down the physical labor for women. Supporting women's cooperatives is big, gives them collective power, market access,
Right.
also business and life skills training, trying to challenge those harmful gender norms within communities, and creating ways for women to actually participate in designing and running these projects.
It's definitely good to see this growing awareness of NSET's potential for gender equality.
Yes, but like we've said, it's absolutely crucial to really evaluate how effective these things are. Are they truly benefiting women long term? It needs more than just practical fixes. You have to tackle the social barriers and, critically, ensure women gain real control over resources and income. A holistic approach is key for sustainable empowerment.
Okay, looking ahead now. How might changes in NSET farming, new tech, modernization impact gender roles and women's empowerment? Seems like potential for good and maybe some risks.
That's a very good point. Modernization could definitely shake things up, gender-wise.
Also potentially.
Well, on the plus side, better processing tech, mechanized scrappers, things like that, could drastically cut women's workload, free up their time for other things, education, income.
That'll be huge.
Yeah. And maybe disease-resistant, higher-yielding varieties, or using mobile apps for knowledge sharing that could empower women with info, boost productivity, income.
Okay, those sound positive. But what are the potential downsides we need to watch out for?
Well, one big concern is mechanization. If processing, traditionally women's work, becomes mechanized, men might take over those roles. That could displace women or reduce their control over that part of the value chain.
Aye.
And if NSET becomes much more commercialized, there's a risk that men who often already have better access to resources, markets could consolidate control over the crop and the income, unless there are deliberate efforts to make sure women maintain ownership and control.
So it's not just about the tech itself, but how it's introduced, who gets access, who benefits.
Exactly. We absolutely need gender-sensitive approaches to all the research, innovation, development around NSET. That means actively working to challenge the traditional roles that cause inequality and aiming for fair sharing of benefits and burdens.
And making sure women's voices, their needs, their incredible knowledge are central to all this change.
Absolutely essential. Incorporating women's needs, their local knowledge, their perspectives into designing new tech, new practices that's vital to ensure modernization empowers, not marginalizes them.
So the future holds promise, but it really hinges on a solid commitment to gender equality guiding those changes.
Precisely. Proactively prioritizing women's access and control, challenging limiting norms, making sure tech empowers everyone equitably.
So bringing all this together, what's the main takeaway from our deep dive into NSET and gender in Ethiopia?
Well, it's complex, isn't it? You see women playing this absolutely vital, significant role cultivation processing,
Hmm.
but it often contrasts sharply with their limited economic power and control over resources and benefits.
Hmm.
NSAID is the bedrock of food security, offers income paths, but women often carry that heavy labor burden while men dominate the more profitable parts of the chain.
But at the same time, NSET has this deep cultural meaning for women, and that could be a foundation for positive change, for empowerment.
Yes, that cultural rootedness offers a strong base to build on, and we are seeing projects trying to improve women's standing. Modernization has potential too, but only if it's handled with a real focus on gender equity.
So looking ahead, what are the crucial steps needed for a more gender-fair future for NSET and the women involved?
Well, policies really need to prioritize gender equitable value chains, ensure women get much better access to resources, land, credit, technology, and promoting their real participation in decision making at all levels, household, community, bigger picture, and actively working to change those harmful social norms that hold inequality in place.
And for anyone wanting to understand this better or contribute, where is more research needed?
Definitely need to look at the long-term impacts of these empowerment projects, more study on the specific gender effects of new technologies, and developing better gender-sensitive ways to actually measure progress in women's empowerment in the NSET sector. Those are crucial areas.
This has been, well, really insightful, a fascinating deep dive. It's remarkable just how deeply gender roles are tangled up with even the most vital, resilient food sources. As we wrap up, it really makes you think, doesn't it, about what it truly takes to ensure progress in any sector, but especially agriculture, truly benefits everyone fairly and doesn't just accidentally deepen existing inequalities. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into NSET and gender in Ethiopia.